Right, ladies and gentlemen, at this moment, I take you to my first monologue for tonight, and it centers on what has been happening in Africa of recent. We're talking about the Renaissance, the new Pan-Africanism that is seeing a change in political leadership across the continent. In recent times, Africa has witnessed a resurgence of political upheavals, particularly in the Sahel region, where coups have become more prevalent. While the Western powers have condemned these actions, the local populations have often welcomed them. Organizations like ECOWAS, the Economic Community for West African States, and the African Union, influenced by Western interests, have threatened to isolate countries where coups have taken place. However, a noteworthy trend has emerged in the aftermath of these coups. The coup leaders, despite their undemocratic means of seizing power, have shown a remarkable connection with the masses and have initiated economic reforms aimed at improving the lives of the people they seek to govern. These new leaders of Africa are advocating for a new Pan-African vision, one that challenges the status quo and calls for greater autonomy for African nations. They envision a united Africa with open borders, a single currency, a common market, and a continental army to counter the presence of foreign powers like the United States of America, Russia, and France on African soil. What sets these emerging leaders apart is their emphasis on the power of the people. Most of them are young, below the age of 50, offering hope to the continent's overwhelmingly youthful population that change is possible, and that they too can aspire to leadership roles. A striking example of this new wave of leadership is the recent election of Bassirou Faye as the president of Senegal. At just 44 years old, Faye represents a new generation of leaders who are determined to break free from the legacies of colonialism and prioritize the well-being of their people. This election marks a significant shift in Senegal's stance towards the coup leaders in neighboring countries, challenging the traditional regional alliances and policies enforced by bodies like ECOWAS. Faye's presidency signals a resurgence of debate around creating a unified West African currency independent of former colonial powers like the French or France. His bold stance against foreign economic dominance and his support for fellow coup plotters have garnered attention both regionally and internationally too. The eyes of the world are on Faye as he navigates the complexities of governance and strives to fulfill his promises of improving on the lives of Senegalese citizens. However, this new era of leadership in Africa also highlights the stark contrast with the old guard of African politics. The entrenched leaders who cling to power at all costs. I'm talking about figures like Paul Biya of Cameroon, who has ruled for over 4 decades, or Alassane Ouattara of Côte d'Ivoire, who shows a desire to remain in power indefinitely, stand in stark contrast to the youthful energy and aspirations of leaders like Faye. The emergence of leaders like Faye and the changing political landscape in Africa offer valuable lessons for the continent's youth. The examples set by leaders who prioritize the needs of their people and challenge entrenched power structures provide inspiration and hope for a brighter future. The call for African self-determination and unity resonates, ladies and gentlemen, with a generation that is eager to see a more equitable and prosperous Africa, free from the grip of external influences. As Africa navigates this period of transition and transformation, the experiences of countries like Senegal and the Sahel region serve as a beacon of hope and a reminder of the power of collective action and visionary leadership in shaping the future of the continent. That is my first monologue tonight. I am being joined, ladies and gentlemen, by two powerful young men here who have been in the middle of this studying it, and they will tell the story in their own words. But before I get there, I'd like you to pause for a second or a minute and listen to this.
Fellow citizen, please lend me your ears and concentration for just 4 minutes. Now, for several years now, I've had the privilege and blessing of traveling, working with professionals and educating students across the world. UK, China, Singapore, Malaysia, South Africa, Greece, and counting. However, ever so often, I engage in soul-searching thoughts on Africa, Nigeria, our homeland, and the black race in general. You see, I can't seem to work out why, despite abundant human and natural resources and exemplary achievements of Nigerian professionals abroad, our nation remains backward in all indices of human progress. Look, recently, a 1988 statement by William Botha of the apartheid South Africa challenged me to tears. Now, he said, black people cannot rule themselves because they don't have the brain and mental capacity to govern a society. You give them guns, they'll kill themselves. Give them power, they will loot the treasury. Give them independence and democracy, they will use it to promote tribalism, ethnicity, bigotry, hatred, killings, and wars. Now, fellow citizen, let me challenge you. Have you, your leaders, or government proved this racist South African wrong since the statement in 1988? Think about that. You see, we are the only race that is ready and willing to sacrifice meritocracy, national development and progress, to favor protection of tribal and religious loyalty, despite the recycling consequences before us since independence. Take a look at the literacy rate of Nigeria. At 62% national average for adults in general, and 65.1% for young adults of 15 to 24. One expects informed national decisions with positive national impacts on, for example, the quality of the elected national leaders. Not really in our case. We are not moved by the economic and security realities and human suffering in our nation. We are not moved by the quality of our leaders. or how and why the black man is being ridiculed worldwide, providing our tribe, political party, or religion controls political power. That's shameful. Even our highly educated professionals and media outlets, North and South, keep a blind eye to the realities of the Nigerian state for tribal, religious, and personal enrichment considerations. Yet, we wonder why our nation remains the poverty capital of the world. Yet, we wonder why the black race is increasingly undervalued and humiliated across the world. Who did this to us? Who did this to us? Do you ever ask this question? COVID-19 has exposed the state of our nation and the cumulative impact of the quality of our leadership over several years. Our leaders are repeating the errors of 500 years ago, when our kings and military aristocrats sold our people into slavery for mirrors and gunpowder. They failed to realize that by that decision, they had confined future generations into perpetual slavery, exploitation, and abuse. Today, foreign powers are acquiring hectares of land outright across Nigeria and Africa for the next phase of our slavery or colonization. Once more, our leaders are mortgaging the future, freedom, existence, survival, and progress of generations for short-term, worthless, stage-managed red carpet receptions, handshakes, cheap collateral loans, travel visas, and personal gains. These colonizing countries are not to blame for taking decisions in their own national interest. The question is, are our leaders making decisions in our own national interest?
Leaders making decisions in our own national interest. That is the question we hope to answer today with what is going on. The kind of revolution that we see going on in Africa today, where our people turn to be hailing military leaders and shunning their civilian counterparts. I am being joined, ladies and gentlemen, by the person you just found on your screen there, Dr. Israel Davidson is a professor. He's joining me from London. And I will also be joined here by the one and only Eric Chinger, who is a media expert. He lives in Washington, D.C. Dr. Davidson, good to have you back here again, sir.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great pleasure being here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Wonderful. Now, you produced that little short documentary there about, I think, a year or two ago. Considering what we have seen in the Sahel and elections in Liberia, elections in Kenya, elections in Senegal, do you see any change coming to Africa?
That's $1 million question, Chris.
Okay.
I tell you what, it's good to always remain hopeful. And I'm very hopeful that the future is bright. But I don't want to simply come to a very fast conclusion about where we are heading simply because there are some mini revolutions that are taking place, some through military coups, and democratically, if you like, as we see in Senegal. But I believe these are signs that if we can get our acts together, particularly with a united Africa, I'm happy you mentioned that in your introduction, where the whole states of Africa become a United States of Africa, where we have a single military, a single president, and where we trade with a common currency and we make decisions that affect Africa and the black race generally from a central command. When we get to that point or near it, you invite me once again and ask me that question, and I'll be prepared to answer. Thank you.
So I guess you are saying we are still far from there, I guess.
Yes, I think so, yes.
All right. Let me welcome Eric Chinje, who is an analyst on Africa and a veteran journalist in that matter. He has been traveling Africa, lecturing the media on good governance and the practice of good journalism. Eric, it's great to have you back, sir. It appears you're okay. I think I can hear you now.
Okay, because we've been having some problems with, after you called me. But if you can hear me and you can see me, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And your hair, your gray hair, and your eyes.
That's part of the aging process, my brother. And we're getting there. I'll be celebrating my 7th decade on Earth very soon.
Oh,
so
my.
it's no, it's no easy achievement, I think.
So tell us, you have been witnessing what has been going on, elections in Liberia. I'm talking about peaceful transitions taking place in Africa without any pressure. I guess, for the first time in decades, look at Liberia, look at Kenya, look at Tanzania, look at the recent case of Senegal only yesterday. What do these tell you, and what can you say about them? At the same time, you have sit-tight leaders of countries like Cameroon. You have places like Uganda and so on. In Africa, you have also all the old guards. Look at Tinubu in Nigeria. The man can barely sit on any conference table for 20 minutes without dozing off on the table. You have Alassane Ouattara in Cote d'Ivoire, who probably would love to go for another term in spite of the fact that he's been there now for almost a decade. What do these changes mean to you and the continent?
Chris, and I'm happy to be a part of this conversation, and I'm really hoping that we're not just talking for the sake of talking. I really enjoyed the piece, the video piece that you played, and also the ideas that came from the intervention of Dr. Davidson. Let me say this. Countries, it's been said, countries get the leaders they deserve.
Right.
Absolutely. The leaders are an emanation of the people. They emerge from that social arrangement. And there's no, we can't dream our way out of to obtain the quality leadership that we think we deserve. Look at, you're pointing to a number of examples on the continent. Senegal, you've talked about that, but talk about Rwanda. What explains the rapid? Rwanda was completely destroyed 30 years ago. What explains the rapid re-emergence of this country? And that everyone is talking about it today as an example of where Africa can go. We're talking about Senegal as an example of democracy. But look beneath the surface and see what has been happening in that country over the last 3 decades. There's a president who wanted to stay for another term in Senegal, as Alassane Ouattara you've talked about in Cote d'Ivoire. What happened in Cote d'Ivoire? Alassane Ouattara successfully imposed his dictates. In Senegal, in spite of Alassane Ouattara's help, and I must mention Alassane Ouattara and I worked together in the Bretton Woods institutions, in spite of his efforts and the help he tried to give Macky Sall, it did not work in Senegal. So Macky Sall had all the instruments of power, tried to use them to stay on, and he couldn't. Alassane Ouattara had those same instruments and successfully imposed himself in Côte d'Ivoire. Now, Biya has those same powers and is succeeding in staying on in power in Cameroon, and actually told the French president that the French was ne dure pas qui veut, mais qui peut. So you don't stay in power because you want. You stay because you can. That's what Mr. Biya told the French president. And that French president was long thrown out through the democratic process. You know, as Mr. Hollande, François Hollande.
Right.
Now, the point I want to make here is, until we as Africans, as the people of that continent, until a critical mass of Africans decide that we're going to do it together, we're going to be together, we're going to find that complex mix that ultimately would bring out the results we want. We need to, go back to the drawing board and ask ourselves, how do we take all the resources given to us by nature and transform those resources into wealth and equitably distribute that wealth? Until we ask ourselves that question and figure out how to do it, I don't think Africa is going to come out of the woods. And the reason we can't find it is...
Doesn't that have to do with the kind of leadership we have in place, though?
But that's what we're saying. We're saying the leadership is a reflection of the people.
Not in Africa. Not enough. I mean, what do the people do when they go out, cast their vote, and the results are changed at the voting board? What can they do?
I live in America, my friend. I live in America today, and I can tell you, watch the elections of November. If Donald Trump wins the elections, which is probably a reflection of where the majority of the Americans are, if he wins, it's the start of the decline of this country. And I have a lot of reasons for saying that. If he doesn't win, then
a little bit. Hold your thought there a little bit. Taking it back to Africa. When the people look at the case of Senegal, the Senegalese were able to resist Macky Sall and said, you cannot stand this election. And Macky Sall was in a place to say, you know what, I will manipulate this thing and stay in power. He refused to do that. The will of the people prevailed. But when we talk about development in Africa, you have a situation where the people in some countries, like you quote the case of Cameroon. Cameroon has been there. Paul Biya has been there all this year. 41 years and counting. 41 years and counting. Is always having 99.9% of the vote. To the extent they even bring in fake election observers. I mean, what can the people do?
Yeah, it's a reflection of a critical mass of Cameroonians. If you give them that same power, they'll act the same way. And I'm saying, listen to me carefully. If we don't know where that critical mass is in America today, if it is Trump at the end of this year, believe me, America will get a Trump. And he will change that constitution. He'll become a dictator, and the world will be wondering, how did it happen in America?
That is your opinion, though. That is your opinion. Many people believe Trump will indeed save America.
Okay, very good. You're right. So if the majority think he's going to save America, that's what America gets.
Exactly.
And he has told you he'll be a dictator. He has told you he doesn't like immigrants. He's told you they poison the blood of this country. He's told you a lot of things he will do. Everything Trump says, Trump does.
But let's not make this about
I'm not
Trump.
arguing. I'm just telling you that.
Let's make this about Africa, because Africa is where the war is. Let me get back to Dr.
And my point again, Chris, is that Africa will get the leadership it deserves. That's the point I'm making.
That's partly true. That's partly true. But Dr. Anderson, is that the same point? Do you hold the same opinion there?
No, I think he has a very good point. However, I'm not sure how long he's lived in America and how long he lived in Africa before migrating to America. Now, I do agree with him that people get the leaders they deserve, but that is in the context where people have the power to vote. First of all, they have sufficient information that will guide their decision. Secondly, that they have a judicial system they can lean on to be able to protect their interest. And thirdly, that the voting umpire, that in the case of Nigeria, INEC, that they are fair in the way they do things. These three conditions and more, of course, if they're prevalent, then of course people will get the kind of leaders they have, they want or they need. However, that is not the case in most of Africa. I'm a Nigerian. I mean, you saw what happened with Tinubu.
And I forgot
Chris,
to mention that you actually campaigned for president of Nigeria in 2019, Dr. Davidson.
2019 years, I did contest against Buhari. Again, this is the point we're making here. These politicians are so powerful in the sense that they have endless access to the resources of the country. And they have the support of the West, who plant them as stooges. And as a result of that, it is so difficult for a common man, either in Ivory Coast, either in Cameroon, or any other place, to be able to vote their will. One case is in 2023, you saw what happened in Nigeria, that all the laws that govern our election system, they were all violated. That our Supreme Court stepped down so low as to ensure that Tinubu emerges the president of our country. And you see what is going on in that country today. So the point I'm trying to make here is, yes, the people get the kind of leaders that they've managed to vote where the right condition exists. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. But in many, many African countries, that is not the case.
Well, if you look at the case of Nigeria, where they had the recent elections, as Eric was saying here, the people deserve what they get. You look at the case of Nigeria, where everybody agreed, Dr. Obi won the last elections, but Tinubu somehow connived, people will say, with the courts to steal the election. That argues against the fact that people deserve what they get, isn't it?
Yes.
Is that a question to me?
No,
yes,
go
on, Dr. Davidson.
No, that's the same point I'm trying to make here. In the case of 2023, the youth, for the first time in the history of our country, were determined to bring about change, because the country went through a very difficult time under President Buhari. And so they made a very conscious decision that 2023 will be that year in which Nigeria will be seen differently. Unfortunately, both INEC, which is the umpire, the election umpire, even the court, the High Court itself, the Nigerian judicial system generally, everything connived against the people of our country. So although Obi ran a very powerful campaign, I supported him. But unfortunately, the will of the people did not materialize. 2023 will go down in history as the year in which Nigeria was shamed in various ways. If you look at our electoral laws, they were all violated. If you look at the terms of qualification and forgery that were, attached to Tinubu, the court set those things aside. You look at the requirement which says that any president of our country, in order to become a president and to sit at our capital, must be able to secure about 25% of the vote there. He didn't, and that again was overruled. So
also, I think the rules also stated if you had to win, you must win at least, was it 25% or 50% of the Federal Capital Territory vote? That 25%. Is vote, isn't it? Yes. And Tinubu didn't win that.
He didn't. And yet, this is what is worrying here, and yet the Supreme Court that's supposed to, protect that part of the law, overruled it. So this is why I'm very happy with Senegal, that in their own case, when President Sall made a decision to postpone the election date, the High Court of the land, even though he appointed some of the leaders, some of the people in that High Court, overruled him. That's why I respect Senegal. I think Senegal has done quite well.
I'd like to play a short clip of Senegal's new president, Bassirou Faye, for both of you to take a look. This is when he was quite young, had no idea he is becoming president of the country, but he was standing up to the government. Take a look, please.
No, Bassirou, let's start.
I think we have an issue with that clip there.
On est avec Bassirou. Vous étiez en train de dire votre impression, Bassirou.
Ils sont en train de rechercher des leaders politiques. Ça veut dire quoi? Nous sommes dans un pays où on interdit aux gens reconnus par la Constitution de se prononcer. Ils sont en train de violer la Constitution. Et pour le parrainage, et pour dire que dès que beaucoup d'opposition doivent voir. Voilà ce qu'ils veulent interdire. Maintenant, les Sénégalais n'ont qu'à choisir et se décider à faire ce qui doit être fait.
Ouais, merci. Pardon, Bassirou, vous pouvez continuer.
C'est ce que je disais, c'est de la honte pour notre démocratie. On ne s'attendait plus au Sénégal à devoir se battre en prélude d'élection pour avoir des élections libres et démocratiques. Ça, c'est la plus grande honte.
On est bousculé par les forces de l'ordre. On n'a pas pu terminer notre UTV. Donc,
Okay, Eric, let me get back to you. When you sit there and you look at this young man walking on the streets and looking like a tout, and not knowing that in a few years he will become the president of the same country, what should what inspiration do you think other African youths should be deriving from this?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot, Chris. You know, this guy.
Okay, go. No, I can hear you.
The image you saw of Bassirou Faye was of a few months. Was last year.
Last year.
Now, last year, just before he was picked up and thrown into jail. Just before he was picked up and thrown into jail, only to be released 10 days prior to becoming president of the Republic. Now, the point is, again, look at the video clip you showed. Authorities tried to attack this group of young people, and what did the young people do? They surrounded Faye. Faye was their leader. Bassirou Faye was the leader because the Sonko, the head of their movement, was in jail already. And the day where in this clip you're showing, that was the day he was picked up and thrown into jail for a few months, and then to come out later as president. So this guy is only a few months away from becoming head of state. But look at what I want to point out is the protection he gets from the population.
Okay.
He was protected by the population. They protected him. In other words, the majority of Senegalese were ready for change. They saw in him and his friend Sonko the qualities, the values that represented theirs. And they're willing to go the extra mile to ensure that that's who become heads of state. Now, the point I'm again making is a leader, a true leader, is a reflection of his people. And that's who we have in Senegal today. Is Mr. Ouattara or Mr. Biya or Mr. Nyasibe? Are these people a reflection of their societies? My answer to that is yes, they are. Until Africa in general is ready for a leader, any one of our countries, it can be that or it can be the continent, until our people are ready for change, are ready to be fair in the use of the natural resources, the God-given resources, and an equitable distribution of the wealth of the land. Until we get to that, I don't think we're going to come out of the woods at all.
Well, I hope we do. Let's turn this to the international scene. Dr. Davidson. Bassirou has said he is getting rid of the French francs, and he is sticking to what has been attempted in the recent past. I'm referring to the effort to put forth a West African currency, which coup d'Ivoire, acting on behalf of the French, scuttled. But Bassirou is saying, I am going to relegate the franc CFA and put out something new for Senegal. If the ECOWAS bloc accepts it, good. If they don't, we're going for something new. What does it mean when the French sit there listening to this? Dr. Davidson.
Well, anyway, first of all, the French, they don't have a choice. I'm not sure they're going to feel comfortable hearing all this. But I think one thing going in the favor of Faye is the recent military coups, and the challenge to the authority of France has already subdued France to some point. So the talk of probably getting the country out of CFA France is nothing new now in the ears of those at the corridor of power in France. I think another thing going for them is that the Italian Prime Minister has been on the neck of the current president of France, humiliating him at every given opportunity. So what I'm thinking here is that it is possible, but it's not going to be that easy. If you look at the history of some of those who tried it in the past, for example, Modibo Keita, or Keita, I'm not sure how it is pronounced, in 1962, Keita, in 1962, he tried, it was then newly independent. He tried to create a kind of Malian France. The French government did not intervene, but what they did was to influence the neighbors to isolate them. And of course, he had to back down. In 1963, Sylvanus Olympio tried it, and he was assassinated. Thomas Sankara, some people have the view that also he had that in mind. I think at one point in time, the International Organization of La Francophone, had to sack their director, the Togolese economist and former minister Kako Nubuko, for criticizing CFA France. So I'm sure all these history will be playing in the mind of the new president. But like I said here, I'm not sure that CFA France has actually done these countries a very big favor. For example, I'm talking about the member states. For example, yes, one of the floated benefits of the CFA France was that it was going to promote trade between the member states. As a matter of fact, very little trade has been going on between those members of the community of this particular currency. I was looking at some statistics the other day, looking at almost the total GDP of most of these member states, the total is almost about 22% of Nigeria's GDP, even though Nigeria is not actually doing well. So from a benefit point of view, I think the president has got a very good point to make to the French counterpart as to why he might be thinking of moving away from that currency. So good luck to him if it happens. But he will need to, first of all, speak to his people and to get their support. I think he will need to be able to rally around the ECOWAS members, states, to be able to support him. And then, of course, he needs to negotiate with the French. It's not something he can just wake up one morning and then arbitrarily do that. I think it's something that requires him to, get his country to rally around him, get the members of the international community as well. There are other countries like Italy and other countries that can be able to give him that necessary support. He needs to lean on the big number of Africans in diaspora to be able to give him, back him up. So in order to be able to successful on this, that's what I think about it. But it is doable. It should take a little time.
Yeah.
Should ECOWAS say we are not going with you with your single currency? Eric, do you see the possibility of Basiru going alone and saying, okay, ECOWAS will cut you off, we will join Mali, we will join Guinea, we will join Niger, and we will all create a single currency? Can you do that?
Yes, he can, and there are obviously the strengths and weaknesses of such an approach. But what I want to say, what I think we should be, we need to completely revamp, rethink Africa and its component parts. We can have a Singapore in Africa, and I think Rwanda is pointing to that. In other words, a country can come from nowhere, completely destroyed in 1994, 30 years ago, build a powerful economy. That is doable. And Rwanda is...
I think we lost your volume.
Oh, I see somebody's trying to call me, and I honestly don't know how to... I'll find a way to...
Yeah, we lost Eric's volume. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Dr. Davidson, can you hear him?
Yes, can you hear me?
All right, good.
Yeah,
we hear you now.
Back online. Yeah,
Okay,
online, yes.
Right. Now, we have to rethink Africa. Look, you, myself, the three of us here, we understand the challenges of our continent. We know what it will take to rebuild Africa. We need a continent where there's the quality infrastructure that allows us to work with each other. Africa trades the volume of intra-African trade is less than 25%. No continent can emerge as a powerhouse with such limited intra-African trade. So we need to expand the economies of Africa by working together. Nigeria and Cameroon, Nigeria and Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal, and Kenya and South Africa and Tanzania. We should build the infrastructure that is required to make us, not only compete with the world, but strengthen each other in the process. Let me take the example of Central Africa. Central Africa is one of the richest regions in the world, with its oil, with its cotton, with its forestry resources, with its mineral resources. If you include Congo in that mix, we have one of the richest subsoils in the world. Why aren't we working together? Why don't we have a cotton market, cotton factories in Central Africa? Why aren't we developing a petrochemical industry in Central Africa? Given all the oil we have, why aren't we working together to pool our resources together, develop textiles industry because we have so much forest, develop, as I said, a petrochemical industry, a cotton industry, other minerals, that we have in such great quantities in Central Africa. But none of that is being done because Cameroon wants to go it alone. Chad wants to go it alone. Little Gabon wants to go it alone. And at the end of the day, none of us alone can become a meaningful power in Africa, and not to talk of the rest of the world. So, we've got to change the way we see our lives, the way we see the continent, and the way we move forward. There is something called the Agenda 2063. I don't know if you've heard about it.
I have not.
But that agenda, the Agenda 2063 developed by the African Union, of course, exists on paper. And yet it has some of the greatest ideas for moving the continent forward and making Africa competitive. But are we going to do it? No, we wouldn't. Why? Because, everybody wants to go it alone. We're looking at this young Senegalese leadership couple. They will take that country nowhere if Senegal doesn't align itself with policies in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and in Guinea. And then ultimately
You are essentially saying what happened in Guinea, Mali, Niger was a great thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. That's the beginning of the change we desire and we deserve.
In spite of the fact that these are military leaders.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I mean, the military, as long as it is the will of the people. And again, it goes back to what we said. People have the leadership it deserves. And until we can understand that and act on it, we will never have the quality of leadership we deserve on our continent. So
Davidson,
the poor guy in...
Dr. Davidson, I have no doubt. No, Eric, complete your line of thought, please.
Yes, I was just going to say that, with all the goodwill in the world, I don't see Senegal succeeding until they figure out it could be, and they could have the CFA if they want. So it's not about the nature of the currency. It's not about the currency, but it's about the nature of the management of that currency. That's what the problem really is. And I don't know, if Senegal alone can adopt its own currency, can it make it? It could. Why not? Depends on how that currency is managed. Ghana has the cedi. Ghana is managing it. The Dalasi in Gambia, small country, they're managing it. But it will be better for these countries to have a single currency, to develop the infrastructure they need to trade with each other, to build institutions based on what they have as resources. In other words, bring it again to Nigeria and Cameroon and those countries in Central Africa. Let us build institutions that can grow that can allow us to develop the kinds of industries that we need. We don't even have a cotton industry or schools that train for the textiles industry in Africa, and yet we produce a lot of cotton. We don't have schools that train for exploitation of cocoa and coffee, and yet we produce Cote d'Ivoire is number 2. If you add the African countries, Ghana, they'll be the top producers in the world, and yet we don't have institutions that help us master those things. We are still in a very pre-colonial, in some cases, set of mind. That has to change. That is the Africa that has to change. And until it does, I don't think we're really going anywhere.
Dr. Davidson, what is your thought on this? Do you see Senegal being able to implement this new currency within the ECOWAS bloc, or should they cut off and join Niger, Guinea, Mali, and say, let's do something together? If ECOWAS should be a bloc, because I know, as it was about to happen last time, the French used Cote d'Ivoire to scuttle it, and I see them doing exactly the same thing this time that they find a revolutionary in Senegal.
Look, there is an advantage for remaining part of the French-backed CFA because of the stability it brings in the economy and the management of inflation. Because I think it's pegged along with the euro. That benefit is there. However, where probably the current president of Senegal is a little bit concerned is in terms of making some decisions, some adjustments. Sometimes the state of the economy, the inflation, a number of variables do take place, in which one of the ways to immediately tackle it is for this government to take some decision as to what to do with the value of the currency, whether to depreciate it, appreciate it. Now, the problem is with the CFA, the management is with France. And where Senegal is in a situation that they would like to use the currency to manage part of the economy, it becomes very difficult for them because it is a very, very heavily controlled by France. However, now the thing is, when we talk about Senegal sharing currency with other community members there, it is not as easy as that, because there has to be a number of, particularly the economy, inflation. There are a number of factors that these countries will have to make sure they have in common, that they can be able to sustain the currency. Because you can't afford to have different inflationary rates in different countries and still you're using a currency. It's going to have a serious impact on it. So from my own perspective, at the moment, I think he shouldn't be in a haste with doing away with the CFA. That would be my, at least he should be in the office for a while, so that it's I don't think it's good for him to to fight all corners, particularly provoking the French government at the same time. I think he has a lot on his plate. One of the things he needs to do is to manage the economy, discuss the currency with France, and see whether there are things they can do to make sure to give him some leeway, to contribute in management of the currency, which I doubt it. But otherwise, he needs to make sure that this is the time for him to rally his people, try to find ways to increase productivity and export particularly. There is huge unemployment situation in the country at the moment, and that is why the youth voted him. It's not going to be that easy. I think he needs to create an opportunity through which he can engage the youth on a regular basis. I like the American-style town hall meetings. I think he needs to develop some of those things as far as security permits him, so that he can be able to continuously engage the people, not through the so-called secretaries and deputies, but to have that direct contact and sustain his likability, with his people. So I think the currency, he shouldn't rush into that at the moment, but he needs to continue to engage. There's nothing wrong with engaging ECOWAS, playing his part until when it is the right time for him to do so.
We saw him embraced the new leaders of the Sahel. I'm talking about the coup plotters, as the West would love to call them. Guinea, Mali,
Niger,
Burkina Faso, and the rest. Eric, I don't know, in your mind, what do you think is going on within the hallways of leadership in Europe when they look at what is going on in West Africa? Of course, America too should be very much concerned, because when you think about the infantry that they have in these different countries, the dangers are the time will come they will be kicked out with kind of these revolutionary leaders. What do you think is going on within the hallways of power in the West when they see these developments?
I'll get to that, Chris, and I really want to answer that question. But just before I leave Dr. Davidson's intervention, I think, what he said about the currency is very important. But remember what we said. It's not so much about what the currency is. It's about how that currency is managed. And the truth is, the CFA currently is mismanaged. the CFA is overvalued currently, which makes our ability to produce and sell on the global market almost, not profitable. Think about all the people who, the Nigerians and the Cameroonians and the Ugandans who bring in things from, especially the Senegalese. They depend a lot on these Senegalese tailors and fashion designers who come up with things that they want to sell in New York and Paris and so on. And they can't get the kinds of prices they want to get because they're so expensive. And they're expensive because the CFA is overvalued. The CFA is matched to the euro. We don't have the productive capacity of Europe. So, the two have to go together. We have to significantly, increase production, whether it's agricultural production or manufacturing. But those things have to match the currency. That's what gives your currency weight. So it doesn't matter what you have. Your currency can be reduced to paper if it's not matched with economic activity. Having said that, let me come to your question about what may be happening in these European capitals. They are conscious in the European capitals and in others, in China, in Washington. They are conscious of the fact that there's significant transformations happening in Africa. Nobody can deny that. But now, are Africans consciously steering those transformations in ways that would benefit Africa? That's where the question is. And believe me, I think the external parties are more conscious of those transformations and are willing to step in and provide guidance in their direction than in the direction of Africa. So we are again going back to, a mentality problem that has to change. We're going back to 1884 and the scramble for Africa, where external powers are looking to see what it is in Africa that they can draw from. Until Africans take control of that whole process, which is why all of the things we are talking about, intra-African trade, infrastructure across the continent that allows us to move goods and services and people easily, working on our diplomatic relations to allow circulation of Africans on the continent. All of these things are intricately related. And until we recognize the need to work on them, the African Union exists for God knows what. I don't know when these leaders get together, what they talk about. Gabon, you cannot travel from Gabon to Cameroon without, some disruptions in your travel plans. You cannot go from Nigeria to Guinea without, having to undergo, or even go from Lagos, from the port in Lagos, or from Tema in Ghana, all the way to Mali. There are all kinds of disruptions on the way. These things must be resolved if we are going to give that continent, find its place in the concert of nations, and give Africa the weight it deserves as an economic power. But it's not going to happen. So it's not so much about the currency. It's about who we are as people, how we want to work with each other, and whether or not we want to resolve our problems. I have asked God all the time, what is it about the African that you're not releasing the energies of the African? What is it about?
Well, it's good that you brought in the factor of the African Union. I've always wondered, what is it there for? What is it there for? Africa is littered with wars year in, year out. You never see the African Union sitting on the table to say, we've got to resolve this. Look at Somaliland and Somalia. Somaliland has been asking to be endorsed as a full country. They have ruled themselves for 31 years. And not a single African nation would recognize Somaliland as an independent country. And yet you hear of African Union. You hear of this and that. Dr. Davidson, Is the African Union a curse or a blessing to the continent?
I think it's a curse, a complete curse. On paper, look, on paper, it's supposed to be a blessing. But I think, like all institutions in Africa, there is external influence. There is massive one. America, France, not too much of the Germans and the Italians. I think this America, France, and the British to some extent. And you talk about African Union and China. Don't forget about China. China is there. China built a headquarters for them. For a foreign nation to build a headquarters for you with all the technology that is in there, which they are using to eavesdrop, and then
right.
Absolutely. So there is no way that that kind of independent thinking, will be able to materialize with all these influence. The other thing is, for African Union to be able to be effective, they need to have financial muscle. And it isn't there. The member states, some of them are not even able to pay their dues. So at all times, how can you be independent when anytime you have a little project, you have to call on France, you have to call on Americans, you have to call on the Chinese, and then they wouldn't give you conditions. So the project then, all of a sudden, serve the interests of the big powers rather than our citizens. So, like I said here, on paper, all right, if they do everything right, if you look at the charter that established them, if you read everything, you will think Africa
If I can stop you a little bit there, doesn't it take nationalists, good leaders, to stop these French or Western consultation to do what is right for their people? Why must they keep on consulting with these Western powers, as you mentioned them?
I think, like I said, the first one is it's easy to conceive a project. Yes, the execution, you need the technology, you need the finance. And one of the things that the European Americans have done is to convince our leaders that there are no local technologies, no local expertise that can handle some of these projects. So if you look at some of our leaders, when they conceive a project, even where there is the money there, they have to look externally. Whereas there is the local expertise that is there to be able to execute some of these.
How did Rwanda come from behind and was able to do this within a short period of time?
No. Very, very good question, actually. I was about to talk about Rwanda sets a wonderful example. It tells us what can be achieved when you have a leader that has an independent thinking. I know there are criticisms against Paul Kagame, but there are certain things he has done, and he has done them right. How he does it, I have no idea. It is something that, what do you call them? The African Union, to be honest, they have a case there that they can study very carefully and then be able to speak to the rest of Africa and say, look, get Paul Kagame to lecture you and show you the magic of his success. Because we can't continue, to be honest, we can't continue to blame the West and the Chinese at all times. I think the leadership, that is in there, if they can be as nationalistic, as determined as Paul Kagame, I think we can see differences in African economies, in their rate of development within a short space of time.
Yeah, Chris, can I continue?
Yes, jump in, please.
Yes. It's again, and I think Dr. Davidson mentioned it almost in passing, is the quality of leadership. The quality of leadership. What we are seeing we've mentioned Rwanda, but you can go back and see a different quality of leadership in Botswana. That's another country that came from absolute poverty.
And in addition, Tanzania.
You can talk about Tanzania. You can talk about Mauritius. You can talk about Cape Verde. There are countries on the continent that have come from literally abject poverty to shining the light that the rest of Africa can follow. But the point we should be making, because again, you can say this and say, oh, it's going to take forever for us to find those leaders. No. The qualities of the leaders we need. One, nationalists, people who are willing to see the nation as beyond themselves. Unfortunately, whether you agree to this or not, unfortunately, most of the people that lead this continent see the continent grow from outward, out from themselves, and not the other way around. In other words, I am at the center of this universe.
Yeah.
Take one leader after the other. There's a leader, for example, and I have to give, maybe it's in giving examples that we can know, we can understand what I'm saying. Take Ghana. President Nana Akufo-Addo came to power. Across Africa, all of us who followed the continent closely applauded. And then very quickly, I saw that things weren't going right in Ghana, and we all started asking questions. And it happened that in spite of all the good intentions, apparently, and my friends from Ghana, they've let them, please get back to me if you want to. But as soon as it became more about Akufo-Addo and then his family and then his ethnic group before the rest of Ghana, and not the other way around, Ghana started going down. Why? Because corruption started going up. Because the quality of the outcomes of policy declined. Look at what happened in
the case of Akufo, what do you think happened? Because this is a guy who started so well. People hailed him. They saw him as a nationalist. Suddenly, policies started taking a different direction until today. I watched, a month ago where the New Africa something organization, they had a conference planned for Ghana. And on the day of the event, in spite of the fact that they have obtained permission to hold that event at that square, Akufo-Addo suspended the event.
Yep.
What happened to him?
Yes, well, again, this is what I'm saying. They knew that this group, and I know Arikana, the Ambassador Arikana, and I know PLO Lumumba and the others, they were going to be there, and they were going to be critical of the system. And they obviously didn't want that. No, the point I'm making is, and again, it's the same problem, the president of Ghana, and applied this to almost every leader who has failed in Africa. They've come and they've redefined what nationality really means. Being a nationalist really means. Look at Alassane Ouattara. He's done a good job in Côte d'Ivoire. But essentially, he too has flipped that coin, and it is, again, it is him at the center of that universe, his family, immediate family, his ethnic group, and then the rest of the country. Wherever we've seen this happen, failure has trailed our systems. So the point we're making, Chris, is we have everything to succeed. We can succeed, but to do that, people have to step away from their emotions, from their, from self, from the ego, and look at, the broader picture, the macro picture. And that's what's not happening in Africa.
It's interesting that you see with the coup plotters in Niger, in Guinea, in Burkina Faso, and so on. Would you support the military to take over in Cameroon, considering that Biya has been there for 41 years, and it seems at this moment he is still dreaming of becoming the president of that country for another 7 years? Would you support the military to take over in La République du Cameroon?
If the military takes over and does what Biya does, of course, it will not. Militaries have taken over across Africa, and it has not led to anything. Mr. Biya, again, as I say, the greed of the man, his inability to really espouse the nationalist principles, his inability to see Cameroon as a potential power in Africa and place that power at the center of not only development in Central Africa, but development in Africa. The President Bia's inability to see his country for what it is worth is what explains his failure. I know that you know, Chris, I know the man. I will give you a very simple example. I sat with Mr. Bia, both of us, two of us, and I said, Mr. President, you know, this country needs to go beyond oil and develop an economy that could be based on tourism, could enhance manufacturing in specific sectors. And I was thinking at the time of cotton, which I just talked about, the wool industry, and we needed to build schools that would support all of this, and revive a certain number of industries that were failing at the time. This was 30 years ago that I sat with the president, and his answer to me at the time was, I have given instructions to that effect. I left President Bia knowing that this was the end of Cameroon as we know it. And 30 years later, the proof is there for the world to see. I'm making the point about the need for quality leadership, for Africans to agree to work together, for people to leave their egos at the doorstep, and enter a room where we can talk about policies that produce outcomes that we desire. And until we are willing to do that, we'll continue to have all the others. Dr. Davidson was talking about this building in Ethiopia. I don't know whether you've been there, in Addis, which the Chinese built. Beautiful building.
I've been there, yes.
But I can guarantee you that building is bogged. Every stone in that building is bogged. And whatever these African leaders sit to talk about, China knows, and China knows exactly how to use it to the benefit of the Chinese people. Look, we've got a problem, but the solutions stare us in the face. And until we can rise as individuals, as you, Chris Arno, as Israel Davidson, as Eric Chinger, until we can agree to say, I will give up on on driving that beautiful car and wearing those expensive dresses and so on, and just share what I have with the rest of Africa. Until we can do that, until the vast majority of us, a critical mass of us, can do that, I don't see us coming out of the mess we're in.
Now, talking about Cameroon, I'd like both of you to look at the footage here. This is allegedly Cameroon soldiers fighting in Ukraine for Russia. Please, take a look.
Yes, sir.
Передай, пользуясь случаем. Передай.
Журналист.
Журналист?
Журналист.
Окей. Можешь привет передать?
Здорово, брат.
Откуда сам? What your name?
Fabrice.
Fabrice?
Да. Photo? Ok.
Vidéo.
Viens un peu. Attends. Viens pour prendre une vidéo. C'est le journaliste russe. Viens. Viens. Viens prendre. C'est les journalistes, non, les Russes.
Здорово, брат. Как дела? Все нормально?
Да, нормально. Четко.
Привет передавай своим родным, близким. Куда ты хотел передать привет? Говори. Смело.
Русский нет.
Мой камерунский.
Камерун. English.
Французский и английский. Нет по-русски. По-русски понимаю только чуть-чуть.
Родина. Камерун?
Ага. Да, Камерун.
Скажи жене, сестре Камерун привет. Сюда.
Жене, сестре. Камерун. Привет.
Да.
На своем языке скажи, брат.
Своим.
А?
Sister, brother. На своем языке,
All right. Again, this is alleged to be in Ukraine, where you have Cameroon soldiers fighting there for Russia. Now, this is a country that has war in the country going on for 7 years and counting. They are not able to resolve that. And they are out there in Russia fighting on behalf of the Russians against another sovereign country, Ukraine. I don't know, Dr. Davidson, what do you make of this? I will come back to you, Eric, on this subject. But Dr. Davidson, what do you make of an African country that can barely put food on the table, sending an army to go out to Ukraine and fight for another imperial power, referring to the Russians?
Well, look, we don't have sufficient information as to know how they got there. We know that there's the world of mercenaries, where individuals volunteer to make money to fight. I think it's allowed all over the world. You have the Americans, you have the British fighting on the side of Ukraine. As
volunteers, though, not as a state army.
No, I mean, not necessarily as volunteers, as mercenaries, people who, you know. So there's no information here to tell us whether these individuals are there as representing Cameroon. I mean, there's nothing there. So it's very difficult for me to comment as far as that is concerned. But like I said, if they're there voluntarily to make money for their families, good luck to them. Because they are not the only people, they are mercenaries. That's also part of training as well. So I think it will be different if there is evidence to prove that the Cameroonian government sent them there, of which we don't have.
Yeah, I think so too, Dr. Davidson. I believe very strongly that these are mercenaries paid for by, the same way that the Wagner Group recruited people across Africa. I'm sure, the Soviets, Putin and his people are doing precisely the same thing, looking for those, because he needs, he's lost, 30, 40, 50,000 of his own people. He needs more soldiers and more bodies, who will be part of that body count. No, and when young people leave, what we should be regretting is not so much whether the government is, we should regret the fact that young, capable Africans who should be on the continent helping us figure things out, give their talent and resources to the continent, that we're losing all of them. I was just watching, prior to coming here, some report on women in Libya, jailed in Libya, giving birth under the most atrocious conditions. I think I saw it on this on your channel, Chris. But this, these are the kinds of things we should be deploring. Our leaders are failing us for that and other reasons. And the reasons these are happening is because we are incapable of thinking of what it will take to grow an economy in Africa, to transform Africa, to make the place attractive. When I left university in the United States in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, 82 precisely, I was rushing to go home. Why? Because there was the potential. I knew I would be going into a job. I knew I would earn well going into a job in Africa, in Cameroon, back then. Right now, nobody wants to even stay there.
You had the best job. Where the
I had a job. I came back.
You were at the beck and call of the president.
I came back and I had a job. The irony is, on the day I flew from here, from Washington, where I am now, there were 15 of us who left, who found ourselves in the plane. We're all traveling back home. And we're going into vastly different fields. Ernest and Norma, Nana, all kinds of Cameroonians from different parts of the world. They were going back to Cameroon, and they were, we had electrical engineers, we had petroleum engineers, we had all kinds of people. I was going into communication. We're all going back home. Now, in 1994 or 95, one of us one of our friends died here, Ben Becker and Jovens.
Yeah.
And I went there, of course, because Ben was working with me at the World Bank at the time. I went for, to handle the funeral, and I saw almost everyone who had left the United States back in the 80s. We're all back here. And we're all asking ourselves, why did you come back? How could you have come back? And yet when we all left here, we were so determined to only come to America on holidays, never to come back to live here. But Cameroon failed us. And that's how a lot of Africa has failed the children of Africa. No, we've got to rethink what it will take to grow an economy on that continent. And it's not rocket science. I know it's not rocket science. I know that we can, if we organize ourselves, just like these countries we mentioned, Cape Verde, Botswana, Rwanda, and so on, they've demonstrated that we can. And we can scale that up. And we can all put our heads together and figure out how do we build those roads that connect our countries? How do we connect the economic centers of Africa? How do we connect them? Instead of building roads to the port so that our things can go out to the rest of the world. These questions we should ask ourselves. Look at the maritime situation. There's no other, I don't think there's a continent that has as much water resources as Africa has, and yet we don't have the electricity. We don't have what it takes to develop our economies. So, again, happy to be part of this, Chris, but we should challenge ourselves individually and collectively to see where we go.
Absolutely, and I think I wish we had much more time to continue with the discussion, but Dr. Davidson, I give you the last word on this segment.
No, I think, look, we are all in sync in terms of how to solve the African problem. And I'm of the belief that the best way to solve African problem is the Africans who have to do it themselves. And Chris, believe you me, we have the expertise locally to do these things. It is the political will to be able to appoint the right people, set aside tribalism, set aside religious considerations, allow people who are capable to come and handle these projects. Again, it boils down again to what my colleague has said earlier, leadership. It is leadership. The quality of leadership determines the quality of people around the leaders themselves. So we have the capacity, we have the resources, we have the individuals who are capable of taking over leadership and making something better with it. Unfortunately, like we've been saying here, the judicial system in most of African states are very disappointing, corrupt. Yeah. The politicians that are manning a number of countries have taken politics to be a profession, which it shouldn't be, and therefore unwilling to live, even at death. So there's a lot that we have to think about in order to get Africa out of the current state. The African Union, one hoped that African Union would have been able to make a huge difference. As we have seen tonight, there are so many things about that very particular union that puts me off even mentioning African Union. So we have to come together, particularly those of us who are abroad. I'm not sure. I mean, Ambassador Erikana has tried to galvanize and bring all of us together, but I'm not sure she has been able to do it in a very convincing way, because there are people who might want to join that organization. Unfortunately, I think there isn't sufficient information to go into it, but I think there is a need probably to create a new set of organization in which Africans in diaspora can come in, make their own input, whether it's in terms of investment, whether it's in terms of advising governments, whether in terms of joining campaign during campaign seasons, whether it's in terms of nominating and financing capable individuals to come and contest. These are the things we need to think through. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you both so very much for being part of the broadcast. I am hoping that in the near future we will continue with this line of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
so
Chris,
much.
and thank you, Dr. Davidson. Glad to meet you.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.